Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for your patience. We're just waiting for everybody to get admitted and sort out our end, but thank you for coming today. We're going to have a really practical session today. So my name's Darren Taylor. I'm the principal lawyer here at NBEL Employment Law. And I'm going to take you through some of the skills in mastering tough conversations. And we're particularly going to look at a range of different factors here, but we're going to talk about the process for performance management, but we're also going to talk about the process for misconduct, and then some of the more common other difficult conversations that we have in the workplace. So we've got a bit to get through today, and at the end of today's session too, I have the next webinar is going to be a little bit different as well, and we have a link to it, but I have quite a renowned organisational psychologist who's going to come and speak to for NBEL Employment Law in relation to identifying and managing burnout, which will be really important for the situations, in a sense, not from a legal point of view, but perhaps from an organisational point of view, and what strategies you can have take on that. So just hold on to that. I've got actually a QR code that I'd love you all to stick around for to register, but that should be quite an awesome webinar coming up as well. So I thought I'd put that out there now, but please stick around or have a look. If you have to leave early, have a look at the copy of the slides, because there's a QR link for that presentation by Margie Island. So what we're going to talk about today, I'm going to talk about the simple process that you should empower your staff to have with respect to performance management. And I'm not necessarily talking about the actual HR policy or process. I'm talking about the actual having the conversation and managing the issue as we go through in the workplace. So there will be a simple 6-step slide. I'd encourage you to perhaps take note of that slide and use that to talk to your senior frontline managers about, a simple way if they're struggling to be prepared to have these difficult conversations or are not sure how to approach it. It will give them a bit of a baseline, and I'll let you know when I put that up. But that will be a good starting point in that sense for empowering your people to take the steps they need to actually have the difficult conversation and follow through on those difficult conversations. I'm also going to talk about the process for misconduct, the difficult situation of sexual harassment, and then flowing into psychological risks. And sexual harassment too, I'm also going to make mention of some sort of recent changes that everybody needs to be aware of as well. And hopefully we can get through all of that in the hour that we've got. So let's get straight to the crux, and probably the most difficult conversation that a frontline manager has to have is performance management, or secondly, managing misconduct. So performance management, people often confuse the two, actually, performance management and misconduct. Performance management is about how well you do the job. It's obvious, we all know that. But quite often the difficult conversations we're having are talking about the standard of work required, so targets and KPIs. And quite often when we're having this conversation, the first issue we need to make clear is, does the employee know about the standard? Secondly, has it been reached? Do we have policies and procedures in place? That's your starting point to have a look at before you have the conversation. But are there other issues that need to be discussed? So quite often with performance management, we'll have a situation where someone's either not performing, they're not hitting their standard, they're not hitting the required figures that they're required to hit, they're not making the necessary calls, there's a clear fall down. But the other issue might be that what we're talking about is that there are other issues on foot that aren't necessarily KPIs. So it could be the way in which they speak to the customers, how they deal with complaints, how proactive they are on the returning phone calls, how proactive they are at actually completing the work that they've been set, or missing deadlines. Those issues too are performance management issues. They're not necessarily misconduct issues. However, if they're doing it deliberately or completely disregarding the directions that they've been given, it can become a misconduct issue. But initially, that initial conversation where someone may well be not following a policy or procedure is often a performance management issue. So before we have the conversation, these are the questions you sort of need to prepare yourself. So one of the best things that somebody can do before having a performance management discussion is be clear on the issues that you're going to raise yourself. So once we've identified what those issues are that we want to discuss, we need to say, well, what is the shortfall? And how can the shortfall be overcome? So there's no point just having a discussion saying we've got a problem. We also need to say we have a problem and this is the expected solution, or this is the change in the behaviour that I need to see. Finally, we need to sit down and before we go into the meeting and say to ourselves, what is the timeline for improvement? So if I told somebody, here's what the issue is, this is how it's, as I see it, this is the discussion we're going to have, this is what I need you to do to overcome it, and what is the timeline? So when will I expect to see improvement? And it might be, I expect to see an improvement now, but that's fine. But I think we also need to have a timeline to say, when will we come back and monitor this? So are we going to meet regularly? Are we going to meet weekly? Are we going to set up a regular meeting? So say we had the discussion on Monday, would we come back and reassess it on Thursday to see how things are going, and then a further regular meeting on the following Monday? And this isn't necessarily meaning that everybody has to go onto a PIP process. But what we're setting by having what is the timeline for improvement is we're making clear to that employee that the issue is not just going away, that we're going to have a discussion. We're expecting to see improvement. We're available to have a further discussion. So say we scheduled the further meeting for Thursday and they were aware of that. By having that discussion, they can raise issues that have popped up in the interim or said, well, that didn't quite work or something occurred, and we can reassess. It might be that there's a competing work demand that they're not managing properly. But those sorts of issues will allow, by having a clear time frame, will allow us to come back and keep focused on the performance management issue that we're doing. And it's one of the key flaws in performance management processes is that people don't give a clear time frame and don't come back to the issue. We have this difficult discussion, but we don't follow through on the discussion. Now, the next thing is really important too. Is this in writing? Now, writing can be two ways. We quite often feel that, oh, writing must be a written warning. No, it doesn't. If we're going to have a performance management discussion, one of the key things that a frontline manager can do is to have the discussion, like prepare for the discussion, have the discussion, but then record what was discussed and what was expected in an email to that person after the meeting. So, hi Joe, as we discussed, there were some issues that we spoke about. I need to see an improvement in the amount of calls that you are making, or I need to see an improvement in relation to completion of this task that's overdue by a week. Could you, we agreed that you would A, B, C, D. We're going to meet again on Thursday to discuss it, and you're going to aim to get me your final draft by Friday. That's quite a powerful thing to do because it sets that expectation and it's quite clear on what the discussion was. So if there was any confusion at the end of the meeting, by putting it in writing, we allow for the confusion to be resolved, but we also don't allow people to say, oh, I didn't understand that's what was required, because we've backed it up in writing. And then finally, we have a situation of, have they improved? So let's say we regrouped, we had the meeting on Thursday, we turn up on Monday and the draft has come through 10 minutes before the meeting. The issue there is that we gave a clear deadline on where we wanted it. We don't necessarily know why. We can regroup, or it might be that they've improved, but they're still not meeting the requisite standard. So if this continues, then we can look at escalating it if we needed to formal performance management, or if we're starting to see improvement, we can give the feedback is that you've improved, but we're still not quite to the level we're at. So I mentioned earlier sort of the 5-step process that I've got for performance management. Now, the first one is that first slide. Sit down before you have the meeting and develop a clear plan of action in your head. And I'm not talking a clear plan of action about the performance management as a whole, that's handy. I'm talking about a clear plan of action for the initial discussion. So we've organised the discussion. Do they need a support person, or is it not that serious? If it's just the initial conversation, probably not. But what is the issue? How are we going to address the issue? What supports are going to be on offered? What sort of time frame are we going to have, and what sorts of support are we going to offer, or monitoring are we going to engage upon during this performance management initial process? Document everything. So the documentation might be, we know that the person's difficult and take feedback, and we'll say, give me examples. So we may want to have the documentation already on what the issue is before we go to the meeting. But it's also that second step that I spoke about, which is documenting the discussion that we actually had in that email. Finally, we need to put down a date on when we're next going to discuss the issue, and that's important too. In the document everything, you put that at the end of your follow-up email. We'll meet again on Thursday. We'll meet again on Monday, and it's clear. Book in the appointment with that employee. Book in the time that they need to come and have that discussion. And then we look at, with our monitoring, is whether there's success, growth, or turnaround, or further improvement required. So it's important to celebrate what success has been reached, not overdo it. If we're still not meeting the requisite standard, we need to say that. But if we can see some improvement, recognise that there's some improvement, and again, at the end of that meeting, we would document it. I know it seems quite simple, but for a lot of people, outlining these basic pre-meeting steps and then the simple 5-step process for actually handling performance management will actually empower people to be able to take the initiative, in a sense that I am prepared to take on performance management, rather than saying this is no good, you've got to do better. That is doing sort of a quarter of the process, where if you outline to them that it's an ongoing process and there is some onus on the manager to follow up, but also that they will be supported by management if they undertake a clear performance management process, they will be empowered to actually have that difficult discussion to move performance management forward. They will also have documentation if it doesn't work and we need to move to more formal steps like a performance improvement program, or that we're going to a situation where we're saying, hey, I need to issue a warning. If they've embarked upon some basic performance management and actually documented the processes I've gone through, you'll be in a much stronger position to actually say, okay, it hasn't worked. I'm prepared to move forward with issuing a first warning. It'll also perhaps identify some of the other issues. So if there's something happening at home that's impacting upon the employee's performance, they've been a good performer the whole way through, and then all of a sudden it's gone off. It could be divorce, could be marital problems, could be something to do with the kids. The discussion or having the regular meetings will allow to sort of say what's going on, and you can be able to document that, and then at least you can perhaps take some steps to offer support or refer them out to their GP, or say to them, look, I understand that's happening, but the work performance needs to still keep it up, so we'll use work as a bit of a safe haven to get through these tasks. But if something else is happening at home, or you're having some sort of issue where you might need to go and see someone, go and attend to that. But at least we're getting to it early rather than letting it blow out for 3 or 4 months and it becomes a much larger issue at a later time. I'll just check the chat really quickly. Sorry, I can only see people in chat at one time. If anything pops up, don't hesitate to put it into the chat. I have EJ with me here as well, so he'll alert me to it as we go through, or we might come back to it in Q&As. But I would suggest quite strongly that the process I've outlined here is often a process that people are lacking. It's probably contained in your policies and procedures, but what they're lacking is how to do it. So take on board, if you're having somebody who's having challenges in actually having a difficult conversation, or that they tend to be a little bit short, just do your job, get on with it, mate, I told you to do that. If they're lacking in their ability to do the follow through, maybe have a thought about sitting down with them, having a discussion. They say, I've got a problem with Thomas. You know, I need to have a discussion. I'm not sure what to do with him. Take them through the simple process I've given you today. You know, print out that slide, the clear plan of action, print out the question slide, and particularly stress the issue of document everything. And the other point I do want to make about document everything, if the meeting is occurring and you want to have a record, or you know that it's an issue that may well become worse, instruct them to send themselves an email to themselves exactly how that meeting went, or send a meeting through to HR on how the meeting went, so you have a bit of a diary note. It can be really difficult, and this is what you need to reinforce to somebody. With performance management, which goes, say, over 2 or 3 weeks, it can be difficult to remember what was said at the first meeting 3 weeks later when there's been 3 more meetings. And the simple solution to that is to send yourself, so I can send myself an email as long as it's a confidential place, or send HR an email exactly how that discussion went. So it's a little bit of a diary note, but if they do it while it's fresh in their mind, you know, you're not sending it to the employee, you're writing it solely for the purpose of what actually occurred. It can be quite a powerful tool in a sense, but it can also shape your thoughts. So this is what we discussed at the meeting. And then once you've done your diary note, move through to that email to the staff member of what's required and where it's going. And it can just help somebody shape their thoughts, but it also gives a pretty good diary note of what occurred. So if worse comes to worse and we end up with an unfair dismissal claim where they said the process wasn't fair, we have it right from the outset of what those discussions were. And it's a 2-minute job, a 3-minute job to type yourself an email. And it's quite a powerful tool, and it's one that I'd probably say stress to your frontline managers. You could even say to them, look, can you send yourself and me a copy of how that meeting went? You know, a bit of a diary note about what was discussed. And it means that you can keep your finger on the pulse too, if that frontline manager has expressed some hesitancy or lacks a little bit of confidence in having these sorts of discussions. I'm going to move on to the next one, which is a slightly different issue. So it's not the performance management difficult discussion, it's the misconduct discussion. Now, misconduct is very different from a performance management issue. It covers the traditional areas of theft, fraud, but it also talks about reputational damage of a business can be misconduct, or disclosure of confidential information, bullying, sexual harassment, or breach of a lawful direction. So I told you not to take that car or out on the weekend, or I told you not to speak to that particular client that way, and they panic and they go off and then they make the issue 10 times worse, or say, how dare you make a complaint about me. That's quite a common one, actually, particularly for younger staff members. They receive a complaint from a customer and then send an email back berating that customer once their manager actually told them, hey, I'll deal with this. And they go out of their way to defend themselves by actually attacking that customer back, which actually causes a bit of reputational damage to the employer. But where we have these more serious issues, and then they're normally one-off issues, but they can be more extensive. It can be an ongoing issue, say, of bullying or of harassment. But this is about the way you interact in the business, not necessarily how you're performing. People do confuse the two issues. They say, oh, I have to do a performance management process for misconduct. And no, you don't. With misconduct, we address the issue head on. And it's essentially that sort of behaviour needs to immediately stop. Obviously, with theft, fraud, assault, you're often not in the business once these issues have come to light. The usual process, obviously, being that we issue a show cause letter, and then we immediately suspend somebody in those more serious matters. So the process that you could sort of stress to somebody if they come to you with a misconduct issue is as follows. Now, the usual process for a misconduct issue is that we gather all the information together, we work out exactly what the issue of the misconduct is, and we put it together in a show cause letter. Now, it can be a show cause letter or it can be a notice of allegations letter. They're one and the same quite often. They've both got a similar style or content. But what's quite clear here is we identify exactly what the element of misconduct is. We outline quite clearly what the facts that have been relayed to us, and we ask them to provide a response. So it's almost a little bit like a charge sheet. What we're doing is saying, hey, this is what you've done. This is how it breaches the code of conduct, or this is how it breaches that policy, or this is how it amounts to direct insubordination. That's quite often that's one of the issues that people come to me and they say, I've got somebody who just does the exact opposite of what I've said. It's not a performance management issue there, where it's deliberate or where it's something where somebody's thought about, I'm not going to do that even though I've been directed to do it. That's a misconduct issue. Now, if it's a more serious issue, so if it's more, say, the harassment or bullying, sexual harassment, an assault, abuse, those sorts of issues, or direct insubordination, you may want to consider whether or not we need to do an investigation. Now, investigations can be both internal or external. Depending upon the gravity of the matter, you might want to pick up the phone and have a chat to us to say, hey, I've got this issue. What should I do? Should I investigate it? This is how I was thinking of investigating it. If it's a more serious issue, you may want external providers. So you may want to use a lawyer if it's quite a serious matter to get legal professional privilege to attach over the final investigation reports. You may also want a lawyer in the sense to be an external party coming in and providing that initial findings and conducting the interviews for you. So you remove the ability of there to be bias thrown at the investigator. So where you've got to say another manager, oh, you're just supporting the other manager. The investigation was flawed from the outset. By using an external party, you can overcome that issue quite often, particularly in the more serious issues. And the investigator won't be the final decision maker. The investigator's role is to put together a report with the findings of essentially what's occurred, what's been said, what are the facts. And they may make certain recommendations, but ultimately the employer or a delegated person in the organisation, such as a director or a senior manager, will be the ultimate decision maker who makes the actual finding. And then you will have a determination. Once we've made the determination, so let's say we've established that there's been misconduct and that determination has been made, you quite often are sensible to say this is the intended disciplinary action that we intend to take, and then allow them to have input at that stage again. So that's quite often a mistake that a lot of employers make. They do the show cause letter, they do the determination, but they don't allow any input on what the actual outcome will be. And that exposes you to an unfair dismissal application because they say, I was denied procedural fairness, to say, I've got this going on at home, or this is my first occasion and you've just missed a step. So it can be quite a powerful step just to talk through what that misconduct process will be before you pull your final trigger. Have you sort of ticked all your boxes? So it's a fairly easy sort of thing to do. You need to consider the response and make it clear that we've considered the response. It may not change the outcome. Sometimes it does, but in clear cases of misconduct, often it's more them saying, sorry, I won't do it again. And then you need to make a decision whether or not you want to issue a warning or whether you want to terminate, and then move ahead with implementing the required disciplinary action. So you can see that if you took a performance management approach to a misconduct issue, we end up with a very different process and a very different outcome. So the key here is to sit down with the staff member when they say, I've got an issue, and say, well, which process do we need to undertake? Is it a misconduct issue or a performance management issue? 9 out of 10 of them are going to be performance management. But when we move into that misconduct, we need to sort of say to them, well, this is the sort of process we're looking at. This is where we're going. I'll need to perhaps help you a little bit with misconduct issues and get HR involved too. Quite often it's better in a situation where it's a misconduct issue that HR take the lead. If you haven't got HR, then go and seek assistance. We can certainly map out a misconduct plan for you in depth to take someone through it. But it's the key here is identifying out the outset, am I dealing with misconduct for that difficult conversation, which will be a bit more of an involved process, or am I dealing with a performance management issue where I want to empower my frontline manager to take those sorts of steps? So let's look at it, and there can be a blend, so it's not always clear cut. I'll give us an example. So, and I'll get you to put into chat whether you think these are conduct, misconduct, or performance issues. So Yellow Umbrella is a hardware supplier in New South Wales. Barney is an assistant to the General Manager of Finance. He's failed to take 40% of the phone calls to the GM's office. He's mistakenly sent Q1 details to the wrong email address instead sending them to another employee marshal who's a marketing coordinator. He's made sexual innuendo and comments about another employee, Robin, saying she is easy, implying that there's been a relationship of an intimate nature with Kevin, the sales manager, to other staff. He's posted on social media that Ted, the CFO, is a clown who does not know what he is doing. In Teams meeting, he's been noted rolling his eyes and crossing his arms at anything the CEO, Lily, says. He's missed entering 5 meetings into the calendar, which even led to the GM missing a leadership team meeting. And an audit of the internet shows Barney has been streaming Netflix during work hours. So you can see there, have a look at it and just put in chat really quite quickly what you think, how you would treat this issue and why. And I'll come back to it a little bit in a sense, because in my view, some of it could be viewed as performance issues, but some of it's quite not, you know. So if we look at it, failing to take 40% of the phone calls to the GM's office, in my view, that really is perhaps, if you looked at it, it could be a performance issue. You know, that you're just not doing what you're required to do. But if we look at it in a context of a whole here, we have somebody who's deliberately undermining their GM. So what we have here is most of the behaviour is directed towards management as a whole. You've got an attack on Lily in the meetings, which is, you know, clear insubordination by rolling over it. Sending the Q1 quarter details to the wrong email address. I've done things like that. But where it seems to be as part of a pattern where you're asked to do things, you're failing to put the calls through, you're undermining management, you're deliberately sending emails to the wrong person. We're moving now more into misconduct, aren't we? You know, the issue with respect to another employee, Robin, is that's likely to be straight out sexual harassment, which is a misconduct issue. And then we've got an issue with Barney using Netflix and the improper use of resources. It could be that he's bored. It could be that he's just failing to use time. And in a one-off issue, you might say, look, it's a performance management issue. But here it seems to be a pattern of somebody who's completely disconnected from their job and is deliberately either not doing things or deliberately doing the job badly. So for me, I would probably look at this as a whole and move into a misconduct issue with some elements of performance management that we would like to stamp out. But I would probably address or look at what the root cause is that's leading them to attack management as a whole. And if it's perhaps simply that they are unhappy about something else and this is their way of expressing their discontent, then I would deal with it as a behavioural issue and a misconduct issue and see, you know, you could have a discussion and say whether we could cut it out quickly, but if it continues on, I would probably move forward to dealing with it as a more of a formal misconduct issue. Does that sort of make sense? Yeah, I'm just looking at the chat here. A lot of you saying, yes, it's a combination of both. But I think it's probably got to that stage, if it was me, I'd be saying, we probably let it go too far, and it would be one where we should at least embark upon some initial misconduct discussions. And then if the behaviour continues, well, I'd probably go into a full-blown misconduct process, to tell you the truth. But again, the discussion here is to empower your frontline managers to bring these issues to your attention. If they brought these issues a little bit earlier, we may not be here with 6 or 7 of these issues. You know, we may have addressed their attitude at work earlier on, and it might have been a performance issue then to a certain extent, or a general misconduct discussion that we didn't blow into a full-blown investigation. Where here, it might be something that's a bit more serious and we're doing an internal. I probably wouldn't necessarily, except for perhaps the sexual harassment, I probably wouldn't move straight to an external investigation, but I'd probably put in place an internal investigation to say, hey, we've got these issues. We want you to provide us a response as to what's going on, see what they respond with, and then work out where we go with it, with the sense, you know, are we issuing them a clear written direction, or are we issuing them, say, a first and final warning that this behaviour can't continue? So difficult conversations, why should we have them? And this might be one of the things that you can push out to your senior teams. Well, one is for behaviours, which we've just gone through in the last slide. You can see why it's important to address these sorts of things head on. And you can also see why it's really important we document what those discussions were. So those emails to yourself, those booking in the follow-up calls, that's still very important. Performance, absolutely. But also difficult conversations about complaints. So where another colleague has complained about another colleague, well, yes, let's sit down and have a discussion, work out what that issue actually is and what's the way forward. Conflict. Conflict's the other area. So not all difficult discussions have to end up being a performance management or a misconduct issue. Quite often, two staff members just don't get along. It could be something that they don't gel as personalities. It could be one person has expectations that the other and impose those expectations upon another person, and that other person resents those expectations, and there's a conflict brewing over time. You start to hear snide comments in the office, or one person starts to all of a sudden is making general complaints about that person, or rushing to their manager's office to complain about that person on a regular basis. That's an important time to have a difficult conversation with probably two people. One, the person who's making the complaints, to say, well, what is going on? What is the issue? Is there any basis to the issue? And if they're coming with sort of frivolous complaints, you need to sort of say, well, what is it going on? Like, and perhaps do a little bit of an investigation to say what's driving that type of behaviour. The second one is to say, okay, do I need to have a general discussion with that person to say, hey, you might not be aware of this, but when you do X, it impacts the rest of the team by Y. And to have that sort of issue, and just to see that they may not even be aware they're doing it. They might be too chatty. They might be interrupting somebody when they're in the middle of their monthly report or some key issues. And it might be pointing out to them that sort of behaviour is starting to actually grate a little bit, and to have those sorts of discussions. But if somebody is feels empowered to actually do something, they're more likely to have the discussion with somebody if they feel management are supporting them through, or that they know that they're able to have those discussions. So it's one of those things that where if you empower somebody to do it and you give them the tools and the skills or a bit of guidance, and I'm not talking go and read the policy, it's to sit them down and say, well, how are you going to approach it? Here's some ideas. That can be really important, but empowering them really is the key here. But also, if you have concerns that they might be a bit gruff, you know, it might be say, let's talk it through, let's role play what you're going to do, and give them some skills there. HR are usually excellent at role playing with somebody, but you don't want a situation too where everything gets handed over to HR. HR needs to be viewed in many regards as an overview or a support mechanism, rather than it's HR's problem, they'll deal with it. Okay, so it's important to say there's an expectation on that person to actually deal with it and do it. Why have one as well? Decisions being made. And the other big one where you may find that difficult conversations occur is where you're trying to drive a change from the top and you're getting resistance or silence from your team below. Okay, so may want to change a priority, or you've got a new project on foot. What we're really good at doing with new projects is doing a presentation like this and rolling out to everybody, this is what we're going to do and here are the changes we're going to make, but we never seek feedback, or we've rolled out the change and we haven't engaged in any discussion or consultation. So if you're hearing murmurings about a particular issue or a particular sort of new project or a new direction that you're trying to drive through, that might be one where you sit down and you actually say, okay, we've got to have a difficult conversation. And it might be saying, hey, I can see, empower your managers to seek feedback or set up some formal feedback. But if you're hearing murmurings or you're seeing murmurings, it's saying to your frontline manager or immediate manager to sit down and say, hey, let's have a discussion. I can see you're worried about something or you seem unsettled about it. Let's have a discussion of what your concerns are. And quite often the feedback they might give you is actually quite helpful. It might be something that you're not aware of, or something that they're saying, well, this will cause this issue that you're not aware of. And it may be the case you need to say, yeah, well, we are aware of that issue and this is the step we're going to take. And it creates that dialogue. But if you just let the mumblings occur and the quiet conversations, dissatisfaction, it will breed and it will amplify. And what you might find is that your new direction falls apart because we didn't simply have a difficult conversation when we were aware or we had a suspicion that it was occurring. It doesn't need to be a disciplinary issue, but it needs to be an issue to say, hey, we have thought about these issues or we are keen on your feedback. But having that one-on-one direct approach and saying, okay, well, provide me your feedback. It's not a consequence to let me know what your thoughts are. And then take that on board. But if they feel they're going to be punished in any way for simply having that discussion, the manager needs to, in a way, create a little bit of a safe space to say, I know it's a big change, or I know you're concerned about the increased workload, but we are aware of it. And by doing this, we might have an increased workload for a month or two, but then things will become easier because it will be more streamlined, or that we've got the resources that we're putting in here. And yes, we've made the announcement and further things are coming. But to have those discussions are really important. The other reason to have the difficult conversation is it's actually a situation where you'll mitigate your risk of liability and risks, the risk even occurring. So if we get to some of those issues or those, those misconduct issues or those performance issues early on, we're giving it a chance to turn around. We're getting it a chance to stop the toxic behaviour before somebody goes off on a workers' compensation claim, before somebody puts in a sexual harassment claim, before, and probably more importantly, because that doesn't always occur, before someone quits. Okay, so if it's a misconduct issue, quite often somebody will say, I just don't want to deal with it anymore. And it's not necessarily the person who's engaging in the behaviour that quits. It's quite often it's the person who's saying, I just don't like this workplace. I can't stand it anymore. I'm out. If we can address those or empower managers or frontline managers to have those difficult conversations now, quite often we will have less staff turnover. The other issue too is that if we're getting to a situation where we need to then manage that particular person, where we've got the evidence, we've got the steps, we can show what steps we've taken, and then when we move to a PIP or we move to an investigation, we've got good reason for it. So I can't sort of stress how important it is and why I'm trying to do a very practical session with you today, but it's a session that I think you could take and run out to your frontline managers quite easily, and it's not a difficult process that I'm asking you to sort of drive out with them. How do you know that a frontline manager doesn't like to have difficult conversations? I put up the keywords. They're not. We've all used these sort of terms, but if you're hearing it regularly when they're saying I've got an issue, but then they have an excuse. Now the excuse is sometimes now is not the time. I don't want to upset them while they're doing this key piece of work. I think the problem will fix itself. They'll work it out amongst themselves. Probably not. Someone will probably just quit. Everyone makes mistakes. It will be okay. Again, that's someone who doesn't want to have a difficult conversation, because how do you fix a mistake if you don't know that it's an issue that's concerning your manager? So you do need to have those sort of regular feedback or one-on-ones, or if it's an issue that's, you know, they're prepared to raise with you, it's probably an issue they should be prepared to raise with that staff member. They might respond badly. That's the person that doesn't like to have conflict or doesn't know how to manage conflict. And that's the person you're going to have to sort of baby step through. I don't know what to say. Again, that's where I think role playing is really important. So empower HR to role play or role play with them yourself. It's not a massive problem. Again, that's Australians have a tendency with, you know, at management is if it's not a huge issue, don't rock the boat. We don't need to rock the boat severely, but if we let it fester or you know, we don't do anything about it, it's not a massive problem now, but it will be a massive problem, you know, 5 or 6 incidents down the line. I don't like conflict. You often hear that, and it doesn't have to be conflict. This is a formal discussion where we're trying to assist somebody to improve or to cut out improper behaviour. I don't have time. If someone says they don't have time, it's a matter of them making the time. So it's important to say, well, when will you have time? Or if you don't have time, who does have time to assist them? But it needs to be prioritised and you need to seek their feedback. So by engaging in that strategy I gave you, where they give you an update after they've had the meeting, where they send an email to themselves and an email to you or an email to HR, you're managing their time. And again, remember, we've got, particularly for performance management, we've got the follow-up meeting. So you can see that they've diarised it in, so they shouldn't really be in a situation where they don't have the time anymore. So if we talked about the 6 difficult conversation steps, and it can be used for, but this can be used for both. Step 1 is the preparation. So A, the factual matrix, get our evidence together of what the issue actually is. What's the actual outcome we want? If it's misconduct, who are the witnesses that we may need to interview or talk to? And what do we want to occur? We either want the behaviour to stop or the performance to improve. Step 2 is to have a discussion and to actually seek some of the employee's perspective. So we want to, that's where we're going to build some trust, show a little bit of compassion, but we're also going to be clear on what the expected outcome is. But we also provide a space in which we can find out if there are any personal issues that are contributing to that in the meeting. Step 3, present the facts from our point of view as to what's occurred and what the impact has been, but then also provide an opportunity to listen as to what the employee says is the problem. It could be a time management issue. It could be, yeah, I know things at home are terrible. I've been coming in, I've been struggling to concentrate, or I've got this health issue that's going on. That's often a big one. Or I'm worried about my son or my daughter. But listen and then clarify. So that's to ask questions as to what's going on. If it's an issue at home, say, well, what are you doing about it? Do you need some assistance? Can you access EAP? Have you contacted your GP? You don't have to be the cure, but if there's another issue going on, it might be to say, well, okay, go and talk to your GP. If it's a mental health issue, say maybe talk to them about getting a mental health plan put in place with their doctor. If it's an issue about their daughter, well, what's happening with that? Do you need some time to go and talk to the school? Deal with that. But then finally, once you've had that discussion, you found out what's going on, you've listened to that perspective, you've got to go back then and develop the plan, which, could be simply, these are the tasks you need to get done. You're going to do it in this order, or this is the conduct I need to stop, or please don't do that anymore. And then step 6 is to arrange the follow-up. So if you take the initial slide, the initial sort of 5 steps I have about the performance management or looking at what's misconduct, and then put it into this sort of summary at the end, they should be fairly well armed to go and have that discussion and report back to you on how it went. I'm just going to talk to quite clearly the other one. Why are we required to have difficult conversations? And the reason that we're required to actually do that is a positive onus upon us to manage psychosocial risks. Now, psychosocial risks arise out of the environment in which work is done. Now, where somebody is saying, I'm overworked or I'm struggling with it, or the method in the work, or I'm stressed from the nature of my work, quite often those sorts of issues arise, or those complaints arise out of something where performance management has been neglected to a point where somebody's saying, and then at the first time we ever try and have that discussion, they say, I'm overworked, or I'm stressed, or my manager's bullying me, or my colleague's bullying me, and they go off and lodge a work health and safety complaint, or they go and lodge a work cover claim and put it all in place because we've let it go too far. So one of the things we can do is take a proactive step, and you can sort of point out to your staff, look, we've got a proactive duty to have these difficult conversations. If we let it go too far, we're at risk of breaching our positive duty, our primary duty, to minimise the risk of someone making a complaint that they've suffered some sort of psychological injury. So, and that duty is fairly extensive. The primary duty is to take steps as far as practically reasonable to minimise or eliminate the risks of psychological health arising from work. And what's a psychosocial hazard? Well, it arises from the design, or in this case, what's more important is the management of work, or to take steps to safely manage the work environment. Not necessarily like, yes, the physical plan at work, but for managing a difficult conversation, we're talking about pretty much the way the work's performing or the work environment. But where we've got all workplace interactions or behaviours, which is really important for misconduct. Sorry, I shouldn't have neglected that. But you can see that taking steps to have difficult conversations is probably the most important first step we can take in managing these psychosocial risks. I'm running a bit short on time, so I'll jump over it. But you can see here, psychosocial hazards, they arise across the range. So you can see quite clearly a psychosocial hazard would be workplace bullying or sexual harassment or conflict at work. But the other one where you can see here that I've outlined, a common one is that they say that there was poor procedural fairness in the process. So that's where, particularly say on that misconduct issue or in the performance improvement program, we don't allow the employee to have an opportunity to say what was going on. We just simply say this behaviour is not good enough, improve. Yeah, but you can see in that earlier process I've taken you through, we're actually seeking the input. Now, that input might be, hey, I haven't got time to do it, or I've got this and this impeded me from doing that. And that might actually identify some time management issues or something along those lines. But if you actually allow them to have the input, and even if the excuse isn't the greatest, it then allows you to say, okay, well, that's a separate issue, but it is an issue that's impacting upon this, and that needs to improve as well, and this is how you do that. So if it's a time management type issue, that's important there as well. The other one too, poor organisational change and consultation. So that's where I was talking about perhaps where we were delivering a new project and we don't seek feedback. Use your frontline managers to perhaps get in there and actually have a discussion once people have taken on board. And if you're hearing murmurings or silence is another key one where people are saying absolutely nothing. That's where you actually want to sit down and say, well, what's going on? And it really is, I suppose the other thing you can point out here is this is the first sort of risk management process you can take, is having a difficult conversation. Okay, so if you identify the hazards and risks, which is kind of what we do when we're looking at how we're going to undertake our performance management discussion, we're identifying the risk being that the poor performance, if allowed to continue, may result in, someone complaining that the process hasn't been properly managed. So if we get into it early, we're setting ourselves up to actually manage it appropriately. We're working out, we're assessing what those risks are, so what the performance issue is or the misconduct issue is. We're moving into controlling those risks by giving them some clear guidance on what we want them to occur, and then we're monitoring and controlling those risks. So you can see the risk management process pretty much is the same thing for performance management of how we would have a difficult conversation. So people are familiar with the risk management process. If they're of that mindset, refer them to the risk management process and say, well, this is what I'm outlining it for you. This is why it's important that you do that. So if it's one of those managers saying, why do I have to do this? This is your answer. But if they're not of that mindset, you can just take them through the same process that I've given you earlier on those first 6 slides, but we're both achieving the same thing. We're taking a risk management approach to dealing with difficult situations. I'm running a bit short. I won't go through the scenario. Sexual harassment, I'm going to put it up here quite clearly. Quite clearly, sexual harassment is misconduct. It goes through to a situation where we need to then go and do, and I'd suggest for a sexual harassment claim that you engage external investigators to cover yourselves. But the other key issue for sexual harassment, so it's unlawful sexual harassment is any unwelcome conduct of a sexual nature. Conduct may be sexual harassment if a reasonable person would anticipate the behaviour might make them feel offended, humiliated, or intimidated. The key here is a lot of people get confused between sexual harassment and workplace harassment. Sexual harassment can be one-off isolated event. It doesn't have to be repeated behaviour. Okay, so it could be a one-off comment, it could be a one-off interaction, and it can amount to sexual harassment. So that's one of the key factors that I want people to realise, that if you get a sexual harassment complaint, you need to take it seriously. The other thing I do need to stress is since the 1st of March 2025, there has been an obligation of all businesses in Queensland to have a written sexual harassment and gender-based harassment prevention plan. That plan's supposed to go through and identify all the foreseeable risks in that organisation, look at the control measures and what steps have been implemented to address those control measures. If you don't have that plan in place, you're at risk of a breach of that plan. Workplace Health and Safety have something up on their website in relation to what those penalties will be. It's about $9,000 per breach for not having a plan, not consulting with your staff and implementing the plan, and not amending a plan after each occasion any complaint of sexual harassment or gender-based harassment has been put in place. So I do raise that. A lot of people aren't aware that that plan is required. I will stress it's mandatory in Queensland. It's a written plan. It requires you to have consultation with your staff. So if you haven't got that, I'm raising it here. It might be something that you need to consider. We've got a draft template. You could approach us. We'll amend it to try and assist or review it once you've had a crack at trying to put it in place. But if you haven't got a plan, please go and seek some further information or reach out to contact us and we'll help you get sorted. But I put it up there because it's one of those issues at the moment that people need to have, and it is a difficult conversation. Remember, we've got to consult with our staff about that plan. You may want some assistance to say, okay, well, how do I do the consultation? I would suggest that we perhaps organise a committee of representatives from each area for a large organisation rather than trying to consult with every single employee in the organisation. But once we finalise the plan, then send the plan out as a whole. It's a little bit left field, but I do think it's one of those ones that I wanted to raise with people because a lot of people are like, I don't know what to do with this. So the difficult conversations is a good reminder to bring it up for everybody. Why have the difficult conversation? So if someone's saying, I don't really want to do this, or they say, yes, I'll do it, and then don't report back to you, I think the key point here is if we don't do this properly, we create a risk of what's called accessorial liability. And what that means is that whilst the organisation can be liable when somebody makes a complaint, particularly if they say there was a general protections claim that they were harassed or discriminated against, or that we did not follow through with our formal performance management procedures, if they lodged a general protections claim, they'll lodge it against the organisation, but they can also lodge it against named individuals And they can lodge it against officers of the company. So they can make a workplace health and safety complaint against officers of the company, but they can also add them into a general protections claim or a discrimination claim. And that can create personal liability. And now we all know directors and CEOs face personal liability, but it also flows down to senior managers, etc. So say a HR manager completely disregards the investigation process or engages in a biased investigation process. That could create personal liability for that person for not following the policies and procedures. It could also flow through to a manager, like a frontline manager, who does a performance management process, but that process is completely and utterly flawed. So it's important to get the process right. But that's where we're wanting to seek feedback as to how it's sort of going. We don't need to micromanage them, but we do need to encourage them, support them, but also sort of to monitor how the difficult conversations have progressed. If we do the process properly, we gain a lot. Quite often we'll mitigate the risks and the legal fees that flow from, say, an unfair dismissal claim or dealing with a workers' comp claim or dealing with a general protections claim. We'll also save quite often on the fact that we won't have as much staff turnover. We have retention, or we will have a better outcome if we move forward towards termination if we've done the process properly at the start. So to gain sort of stress the accessorial liability, multi-choice question. Chris, a general manager has failed to follow a grievance dispute procedure, which has led to him being added as a respondent to a GP, a general protections proceeding. Can he be liable? The answer to this is C, yes. Failing to follow your own policy is seen by courts as a grave error. So what you can expect in those sorts of situations, that if we don't follow through what we say we're going to do, we don't do the process properly, we can certainly find ourselves in a situation where it's not just the company that's paying the bill. Nowadays, particularly with general protections claims, you can be named as a second respondent, and that's not determined by the Fair Work Commission. It's determined by the Federal Court or the Federal Circuit and Family Court, and they can attach personal liability. So they can apportion some pecuniary penalty to that second respondent. So where you're the person that's perhaps disregarded the policy or procedure, you can find that you can end up with 20, 30 grand pecuniary penalty being paid, as well as the company paying certain parts of aspects of that fine. So the key for us today is to sort of prepare an action plan. So what the action plan is what's the goal? What risk will be minimised? So for you, it might be today to go and talk to my frontline managers about how to have difficult conversations. Tasks to be included. So it might be if someone comes to you and says, I've got this difficult person, outline, well, okay, let's have the discussion. How are you going to prepare for the meeting? What tasks are you going to do? What follow-up are you going to do? What is the written documentation that you're going to send to the employee and yourself and myself after the meeting? And what other resources may be required? Yeah. If it's for rolling this out, have that discussion. It might be to say, HR, could you please go and present a basic template to all our frontline managers? And then what's the outcome we require? Well, we want to see people being more proactive. So we're going to do a follow-up in 2 weeks to see, who needs assistance and see if we get more of a take-up involved in relation to people being prepared to have these difficult conversations and engage in performance management. I did speak earlier about, and thank you for sticking around, I put up on the screen all our upcoming webinars, but the one because being from employment law, the one I really want to bring your attention to is that one on the 27th of August. That's with Margie Ireland. She's an organisational psychologist. She's worked for some very large organisations, BHP, Rio Tinto, but she's doing a special presentation for us about combating team burnout and its legal implications and mental health approaches for employers. It's not from a legal point of view. It's more about managing a situation where we've got, say, a team in crisis or a team that's gone through a really large project and we're finding that there's some obvious signs that they're disengaged, and how we can go about trying to re-engage management. It could be important for senior management teams, but it can also flow down to your smaller teams. But Margie's got some really powerful insights about A, recognising it, and B, what you can do about it. So I really encourage you to have a look at that one. It's sort of one not to be missed. I'm excited about it. I'd like you guys to have the opportunity. It's a free webinar, but please avail yourself of it. It's fantastic. There's also some excellent, in the green are the migration workshops. What you will see there is keys to overcoming aged care workforce shortages. That's a massive issue. Migration do have good solutions for that. And same for the healthcare industry, smart solutions for healthcare industry. So how employer sponsorship can be utilised in those two particular industries. And there's been some massive changes. The next one coming up is property law. There's been some massive changes to the disclosure obligations on the purchase and sale of properties, which came in on the 1st of August. Even if you're interested and you're thinking about selling your own house, that one's worth having a look at, because the process, it's the first real major change to what's been required to be disclosed in that sale process for many, many years. And Kaylee and Louise have an excellent webinar coming up on that. So please have a look at that. They're all fairly practical, straightforward. But yeah, they're a great set of webinars. And finally, if you've got any questions for me, or this has struck a bit of a chord, or you're saying to me, hey, what do I do about this particular issue? And it's not one you want to put in the chat. Please don't hesitate to scan that, and we'll make a time to have a chat with you, or just pick up the telephone and have a chat to me. And I know Simon, our BDM, is always keen to have a chat to people. He may well follow people up in coming days too. So don't hesitate to reach out. It's not going to cost you anything to have a chat to me about a particular issue, or if you need some assistance in this regard. So I hope that was a benefit to people. Thank you for giving up your lunch hour. I know Mondays are always busy, but thank you for the time. And look, if you have any questions or concerns, please don't hesitate to send me an email or to reach out on the telephone. Thanks a lot, guys.